Hi, everyone. Welcome to this webinar on Notice of Special Interest, U.S. Health and the International Perspective. I'll give a brief introduction as folks are joining us, so thank you so much for attending this. My name is Kriti Jain. I'm a program official here at the National Institute on Aging. I'm joined by Dr. David Brott, who's also a program official here at the National Institute on Aging. And as we get started, I also want to thank Charlie Lee, Dwayne Diggs, and Mastan Narne who are our technicians for making this webinar happen. So very briefly, I wanted to remind everyone that this webinar is being recorded, and the slides and the recording from this webinar will be posted in the same place that you signed up to attend this webinar. And all participants, for the time being, with the exception of NIH staff, have been muted. And throughout the presentation, please feel free to use the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen to be able to submit questions. So during today's webinar, we won't be able to discuss scientific inquiries or areas for research projects, but for those, please feel free to reach out to me directly, and my email address is on the slide, kriti.jan@nih.gov, or you can reach out to David as well, who will share his email address shortly. We'll create and post Q&A based on this webinar. So if you don't get a chance to write down everything that's asked and answered, feel free to, or you'll be able to get a Q&A later on. And if you experience any technical difficulties during this webinar, please send an email to Mastan Narne. So you can see his email address on the screen, mastan.narne@nih.gov. And if you would like David's email address, he's just dropped it in the chat, so you can feel free to copy and paste it. So if you are here in attendance today, we assume that you are a researcher who's considering applying for Notice AG-24-004, which is the U.S. Health and the International Perspective Notice of Special Interest. So the objective of this webinar is to present the contents of the NOSI, the Notice of Special Interest, to you all, as well as to answer any questions that you all may have. And on this slide is a link to the full text of this Notice of Special Interest. So by way of a slightly more formal introduction, again, my name is Kriti Jain. I'm a program official here at the National Institute on Aging, and my portfolio focuses on field experiments and quasi-experimental designs. And I'm going to hand it over to David to introduce himself.
Hi, everyone. I'm excited for today's webinar and our discussion, and to hear about your interests and questions. As way of introduction, I am a sociologist who decided to cross-train in population genetics and omics generally. And so here at NIA, my portfolio really lies at the intersection of biodemography, sociology, and population geroscience and population genetics. So by way of organizing today's webinar, we will be going through a background, why this is a notice of special interest, some resource supports, and also the application process. And then at the end, there have been some questions submitted prior to the webinar that we'll address directly. And we encourage you to drop any other questions or further clarifications or what you would like us to answer in the Q&A dialog box. So first, background and purpose. Why are we here? Well, simply put, over the last number of decades, we have seen that the U.S. health disadvantage is empirically validated. That is that Americans are living shorter lives and living with more comorbidities than their peers in high income countries, and in some cases, lower middle income countries. This has been documented in the Washington Post, the New York Times, through journal articles, and a lot of other resources. More formally, NIA has commissioned 2 reports that I'll talk about next. So the first was commissioned in 2013 and is U.S. Health in an International Perspective, Shorter Lives, Poorer Health. This informed our discussion of, and our reasoning for bringing this forward almost 10 years later as this notice of special interest, because this continues to be the case. More specifically, in a 2021 report, we see that this poorer health and shorter lives are not limited to a single subgroup of the U.S. population, but are generally experienced by the population writ large. So on the next slide, we have that 2021 report, which really delved novel data sets and looked at the causes of this US health disadvantage. I encourage everyone to, if you're not already, to familiarize yourselves with both of these reports, as they lay a very good foundation for the research that has been done, the areas of science that we still don't know, the mechanisms that are causing this, or those that have differential empirical findings. But specifically, this 2021 report identified 3 causes of mortality of particular interest that seem to be driving the US health disadvantage, and particularly among working age individuals. And those are substance use, suicide, and cardiometabolic diseases. So what do these mean? It's simply the behavioral trends that we see in a lot of substance use, drug poisoning, alcohol overconsumption, and a sharp increase in opioid use. Similarly, the US has a stark difference between its peer countries and nations with regards to suicides. Many of these have geographic and population differences. And in the US in particular, the evidence has pointed to a very high use of firearms. Additionally, poor cardiovascular health. That is the worsening or slowing of improvements in heart disease, hypertension, and other circulatory system diseases. Some other morbidities or causes of mortality are cancers, nervous system diseases, and homicide and transport injury, which the empirical evidence again seems to show that the US has a distinct disadvantage. And so really we're interested in understanding why or how. That is the mechanisms that link these to the performance of the US vis-a-vis other peer nations. So, I will stop there and let Krithi take over.
Sure thing. Thanks so much, David. So given the worsening U.S. public health situation and a great deal of previous work by the public health research community on this topic, what is it that we're hoping to accomplish with this NOC, and how do we think it's going to move the field forward? So first, we think that while we understand what the causes of disease are that David just spoke to you about, we don't understand exactly what is driving them. Hence, we're hoping that proposals submitted in response to this NOC help us to uncover the upstream factors leading to the top causes of disease. Second, we're particularly interested in going beyond the individual level to focus on the meso and the macro levels. If people in the US are in worse health than their counterparts around the world across socioeconomic status, we want to understand what it is about the US context that's causing this. And the way we'd like to get at that question is through comparisons of the US context to other contexts. Exploiting those differences will help us answer what it is about the US that's causing or associated with the US health disadvantage. And if we can understand what it is about the US context that's driving those differences, we will know where to intervene to be able to address how American health is falling behind. So this is a dire public health issue, and understanding its proximate and distal causes is a key insight needed to address it. So stated differently, the purpose of this NOC, which you'll see the picture on the right-hand side of the slide, and that picture is a screenshot of the NOC, and I have the purpose section highlighted, and it reads, this NOC expresses NIA's interest in research that examines mechanisms and causes behind the increasing US health disadvantage, which refers to worsening life expectancies and health outcomes in the US compared to other countries. Of particular interest are projects that examine cross-national and US cross-regional or cross-state differences in policy context that may drive poor outcomes. So said differently, we want to encourage applications for more research that examines the gaps highlighted by the previous 2 National Academies reports that David talked about. And specifically, we hope to leverage comparisons between country contexts as well as within the US's different regions or states to shed light on the upstream causes of death that are driving the US health disadvantage. So here are some specific research areas from the NOC. I'm just highlighting these for you as examples that are described and named within the text of this NOC itself, but please also think of your own research topics and questions and don't feel limited to these necessarily. So the first one that I'll highlight for you is that this NOC seeks to drive applications in research that identifies and explores the drivers of life expectancy and increases in life expectancy increases in high income countries other than the US, as well as how various national indicators of income, education, health, healthcare, and within country inequalities in these indicators, labor market conditions, social welfare, and other regulations are linked to differences in life expectancies. Another example of a research area highlighted in this NOC is research on social protection policies, such as pensions, cash transfers, and other economic support provisions that examine not only individual receipt, but the impact of such policies on social determinants of health and outcomes at population level with attention to subgroups. Designs that can be used to address these types of research questions include randomized control trials and natural experiment designs to examine the effects of social protection policies. So a third example I'll highlight for you is research that focuses on whether and to what extent Americans with a high health and social status, as defined by race and ethnicity, education, income, insurance status, and risk factors, are in worse health than populations and subpopulations in comparable countries at various points in their lives, identifying any specific health conditions where outcomes may differ and examining drivers. Another example is studies that use multi-level designs, such as combining individual and country-level data to examine the causes of increasing suicide rates over the life course among groups who are most affected. And finally, an example of a research area highlighted in this NOC is research that examines how the causes of changes in life expectancy over the last century in the US vary by subgroups such as race, ethnicity, sex and gender, socioeconomic position, and age distributions. All right, back over to you, David.
All right, so now let's talk about some resources and support for applications. Simply put, NIA has invested a lot of effort and money in longitudinal harmonized studies, both within the US and internationally. I think the marquee example here is the health and retirement study. And Minky Chatterjee is joining us on this call as well and can answer some questions about these if you have them more specifically in the Q&A. But this family of studies is representative of approximately 70% of the global population. That is through the HRS in the US and the HRS international studies, which I believe are in 40 plus countries at this point in time. We are capturing a representative population of 70% of people ages 60 plus worldwide. This represents a substantial investment by NIA and NIH, as well as a substantial resource for applications for this NOC that we hope to see used, but they're not necessarily required. Again, if you have access or are familiar with these, we'd recommend that you see if there is some sort of a comparability. If not, that's completely fine. We are open to all study designs and all data sources that might be able to answer the key questions, which is really, why is the US performing the way it is vis-a-vis other countries? I'm going to drop in the chat here a few links to other studies that we have, which include the Understanding America study, which is an internet panel. Oh, my links are not going to work. I will drop them in afterwards. My apologies. The Understanding America study, again, which is an internet-based panel study of the US. Ad Health, which is a national longitudinal study of adolescent to adult health. The panel study of income dynamics, the future of families and child well-being, as well as Share, which encompasses two projects: one, High School and Beyond, and two, the National Longitudinal Study of the high school class of 72, which are being converted into NIH longitudinal studies of aging. So just some resources, and again, I'll drop some links after this presentation that you can access them. But a key resource here is G2 Aging, or the Gateway to Global Aging project, which really walks through in immense detail all of these different studies in the international family of studies in the health and retirement sphere. So moving on to the next slide. We have some key takeaways and application process that I'll allow Krithi to walk through.
Sure thing. Thanks so much. So for this NOC, we are accepting applications that are R01s and R03s, both in the Alzheimer's disease as well as general categories. So on this slide, I have the link to the R03's NOFO, which is PA NOT-AG-24-004. This is called the NIH Small Research Grant Program. It's the link to the parent R03. And under R01, there are 3 parent grants that you can apply to. The first NOFO is PA-20-183, the second is PA-20-184, and the third is PA-20-185. And the awards will typically follow NIA pay lines, and the link is shown at the bottom of this slide. However, if you go to Google and you just put in NIA FY24 pay lines, this link will pop up for you. So the review process as well as the receipt date follow the parent NOFOs. So for example, the next due date for the new applications are October 5th if you're applying for an R01 and October 12th if you're applying to an R03. And so R01s awarded through the National Institute on Aging are subject to a 16% cut on average, and R03s at the National Institute on Aging are not subject to this cut. This NOCI is open for quite a long time, which should allow you time to develop a strong application. So it does not close until May 8th, 2027. Note that there is no special review consideration nor set aside funding for this particular opportunity. And the budget caps and budget guidance will follow each of the activity codes. And to understand specific instructions on filling out those applications, please refer to SF424 R&R application guide. And when you're applying, include NOT-AG-24-004 without the quotation marks in the agency routing identifier field, which is box 4B of that form. Okay. So now let's start walking through some of the questions and answers that you all submitted prior to this session. So we received 32 questions, of which we took 6 of them were a little bit unclear and we weren't quite sure what the PI was asking. So we took the remaining 26, formulated answers to them and grouped them into 9 overlapping questions. Many of them were on very similar topics. So here are the questions that we'll be walking through, as well as the order of the questions. So the first question is, what is the best way to signal to reviewers that you're responding to a NOCI so that they take it into consideration? So there's really just one way to signal that you're responding to a NOCI, and this is information that's contained in the text of the NOCI. So on this slide, what you'll see is a screenshot of the application and submission information section of this NOCI. And the text that's circled in orange reads, for funding consideration, applicants must include NOT-AG-24-004, i.e. the number of this NOCI in the agency routing identifier field, box 4B of the SF424 R&R form. Applications without that information, so they will be considered for whichever parent grant you're submitting it to. So for example, if you're submitting it to the R01 parent grant, it will be considered for an R01, but it won't be clear that it's coming in under this NOCI. So the second question that we received is, will this NOCI be applicable to research conferences? So here, what I believe the person submitting this question meant is, can funds received through this NOCI be used to fund a research conference? And the answer to that is no, because both the R01 and R03 parent grants are meant for original research, but varying in scope. If the asker meant whether this award could be used to fund conference presentations or attendance, in that case, the right place to look for the answer is policies for R01s and R03s. Grants to nih.gov or talking specifically to your program official about your budget is the right way to go. So here's the fourth question, here's the third question that we received. Is there any possibility to submit an R21 for this funding opportunity? So for this NOCI, we are accepting R01 and R03 grant activity codes. Those are the ones currently covered under this opportunity. However, if you are really interested in submitting an R21 that pertains to the topic area described in this NOCI, reach out to your program official or to David or to myself with a specific aims page, and we can advise you on how best to submit your application. So the fourth question that we received is, should I be doing a primary data collection? Is it okay to be doing a secondary data analysis? And so here it is okay to use existing data sets, and the text of the NOC refers to some examples of representative longitudinal studies funded by NIA. And David also talked about several of these earlier in the presentation. So you are encouraged to consider these studies, however, don't feel limited to those studies. And on this slide, I've also included the actual text of the questions submitted. Here are some of the data sets that David mentioned earlier. The marquee study funded by NIA is the International Family of Health and Retirement Studies, which includes the US Health and Retirement Study, the Harmonized Cognitive Assessment Protocol, which we often call HCAP. And this Gateway to Global Aging is a way to access them. And then also, if you look at NIA's website and go to the research section, the Division of Behavioral and Social Research section, and within that, look at data resources, you'll see the surveys named earlier in this webinar, as well as others. Great, and I'll hand it to David for some of the remaining questions.
Yeah, so first, I did drop links in the chat. I got them to work. And so for those studies, extant data, that is secondary data analysis, is 100% okay. What is important is a novel research design that can exploit geographic, and by that we mean policy or cultural or any sort of socioeconomic differences that might be policy targets, right? So we really want to know why and how the US health disadvantage exists both within our own country, between different regions or states, as well as internationally. And so those extant data sources, I think, are a great place to start. But go ahead and answer this question that came in prior to the webinar, which is, which geographic comparisons are of most relevance to the funding opportunity? Well, the answer really is, it depends. It depends on the research question. It depends on disparities due to policy. And I would encourage, Krithi and I would both encourage that folks think about areas in which there is a potential policy impact in the US, but we do not have policy implementation. So that is, stated differently, we have a limited set of legislative and legal changes in the US that we can empirically examine. However, by expanding our set to international studies, that group of policy interventions and changes increases dramatically. And so it really is a question of how best to answer and provide empirical evidence of the drivers of the US health disadvantage or disadvantages within countries. So more specifically, will the RFA consider cross-state differences? Absolutely. Are any specific regions of higher priority or funding? The answer to that is, again, it is about what policies are and how actually are. And I'd say more importantly, what's the scientific evidence or available data that we have to investigate or interrogate the impact of those policies on health? Is there interest in Latin America? Absolutely, yes. Again, the question is about policy differences and regional differences that could be leveraged to gain scientific insight as to what is driving the US's poor performance in health and for its population. Cross-national studies, which should be selected for comparison? Again, it really depends on the questions that you are asking, the hypotheses that you have, and potentially the variables that you want to examine. Do they exist? And then will cross-regional/state studies be considered? Again, 100% yes. And for all of these questions, and just to kind of give you an insight into why Krithi and I are jointly presenting on this and why Minky is here, is because we each have different portfolio areas. And we wanted this notice of special interest to be as broad as possible. So Krithi looks at housing insecurity and policy and randomized control trials. I look at more of the biodemography side of things, and that's where my portfolio lies. Whereas Minky has extreme expertise in the international comparative studies, particularly with the Harmonized Cognitive Assessment Protocol. So yes, is Alzheimer's disease and are Alzheimer's disease related dementias applicable? Yes, they are. And so, yes, when you have questions, we ask that you reach out and we will help identify which one of us would be the best program official to help usher or guide this through the process. But enough on question 6. I can move on to question 7, which is what specific diseases, areas and topics are of interest to us. Again, the answer here is it depends if you're proposed data collection on how you would collect that data and for what diseases. NIA is not unique, but it is of a unique nature at the National Institutes of Health. That is, it's on aging broadly defined. And that encompasses all aging processes, whether that be physiological dysregulation, generally speaking, or whether that be cardiovascular disease, whether that be cancer, and how it relates to aging processes. So disease outcomes and topics that drive the U.S. health disadvantage are of interest. Once again, I would hope that folks would familiarize themselves, again, if you're not already, with the 2 reports, the 2013 Shorter Lives and Poorer Health and Kathleen Mullen-Harris's 2021 report on the rising U.S. disadvantage for working age adults, which identified 3 principal causes of mortality. That is suicides, drug overdoses, and cardiometabolic diseases. So what we ask is that it would be a 1-pager with your specific aims. It doesn't have to be a finalized specific aims, but at least something that is in a general NIA or NIH grant format with anywhere from 1 to 4. I've seen as much as 5 specific aims on a single grant application. But that way we can really discuss in detail feedback that we help you. Yes, we're going to meet and discuss with you via email if it's a broad general inquiry. But for these in-person meetings, we ask that you come with a 1-page draft of your specific aims. And let's see, slide. And then what are the roles of researchers based outside of the US? This is a question that I believe, let me see my notes really quick. This is one that I believe Krithi is going to answer a little bit in more detail, but foreign-based institutions are absolutely, you can have a foreign component, and Krithi will explain that in more detail.
Sure thing. Thanks so much. So these are, on this slide, I have listed out the actual questions that we received, and I want to outline 2 ways that researchers based outside of the US can be involved in grants funded through this NOC. First, they can be involved as a part of a foreign institution or foreign organization that applies for the R01 or R03. So these include international organizations, including public or private, nonprofit or for-profit organizations, as well as other international organizations. Or researchers outside of the US can be included on grants that are awarded through this NOC as part of a foreign component. And what that means is that if you have a grant where any performance of any significant element or segment of the project is outside of the US, either by the recipient themselves or by a researcher employed by the foreign organization, that counts as a foreign component. So for example, if this grant were awarded to a US-based, say, university, and part of that grant application or part of the funds awarded through that grant application went to a foreign organization or researcher or university, that would be considered a foreign component. So generally foreign organizations are eligible to apply for research projects grants. And if it's a domestic institution with a subaward, that would be considered an award with a foreign component. So here the standards and rules to adhere to are those in this R01 and R03 processes that are described within the parent grants. Here, the R01 and R03s do allow application from foreign institutions as well as applications with foreign components. And the NIH grants policy statement, along with the detailed explanations of the parent R01 and R03, will give you the guidance that you need for your particular situation, as well as, as we've been saying throughout, you are welcome to reach out to a program official with your specific questions. I do want to highlight for you that the applications, whether they're from a foreign organization or from a domestic organization, they have the same standard review criteria as outlined in the R01 or in the R03, but applications from a foreign institution will have 2 additional factors, which are that they need to demonstrate that there is a special opportunity for furthering research programs through the use of unusual talent, resources, populations, or environmental conditions in other countries that are not readily available in the US or that augment existing US resources. And second, whether that proposed project has specific relevance to the mission and objectives of the institute or center and has the potential for significantly advancing the health sciences in the United States. Note also that research grant applications from foreign or international organizations may not be funded unless they are approved specifically by that institute's or center's National Advisory Council. So this guidance is quoted from the NIH Grants Policy Manual. So David, I think you have the last planned question, which is that this call for applications is very broad, and can you narrow it for me?
I will happily take this on because the answer is yes and no. Really, we want people to think broadly. A lot of work has been done in this area, but a lot remains to be considered. And so we don't want to give too narrow of advice or suggestions because we want researchers to think broadly what's the word I'm looking for? We want them to think about novel projects or novel ideas that may not exist. For example, is there a randomized control trial in another country that has a health and retirement sibling study? Can we leverage those to examine the impacts in a very scientifically precise way via this randomized control trial? Additionally, it could include novel data collection of biospecimens or biomarkers. It doesn't need to. And so what we suggest is, again, thinking deeply about your areas of expertise, your interests for the next 3 to 5 years for a grant award, and then reaching out to Krithi, myself, and Minky, and thinking and engaging us about how this aligned with NIA priorities. Our job here is to take external researchers' ideas and help guide them through aligning the alignment process with the directives that we have received both internally as an institute and externally through the National Advisory Council on Aging, which reviews all of our grants and all of our awards for merit as well as scientific specificity and rigor. Quickly, we would say that a successful project will be an R03 and an R01. It's limited to those in the notice of special interest, and it needs to have an appropriate time and budget. So please review the R03 and R01 guidelines as in terms of eligibility criteria for yourself as a researcher, as well as the applicable time and budgets that you would propose. For specific examples, we will post these slides and recording this webinar online. However, again, sometimes conversation is the easiest and most efficacious way to answer these questions. So please, again, feel free to reach out to us, but we do ask that you come prepared with a draft spec aims, and that then we can provide, again, that guidance of how this aligns, or if it can be tweaked in such a way to better align with NIA's broader priorities beyond just this NOCI.
Thank you.
And with that, sorry.
You're okay. I just wanted to say thank you so much. And this is the end of our prepared remarks. And at this time, we'll switch over to taking questions that you all submit through the Q&A box, which is located at the bottom of your screen. So I don't see any open questions at this time, but please do feel free to submit them in the Q&A box. And just to reiterate, we will be posting the slides as well as the recording of this webinar. I just want to confirm that no one else is seeing any questions come in. It's not, okay, I see one question has come in. So I'm going to read it out, and then David or Minky, you all can decide who wants to answer it. So apologies if this was already mentioned, but would studies doing cross-country comparisons that do not include the US, but that inform US policy, be responsive to this NOCI? So I think, Minky, do you feel comfortable taking that one? Okay, it looks like.
Yeah, sure. Hi, This is a great question. Um, I actually think that Kriti and David, we should go back and talk to our colleagues here before answering that one. It seems like that could be responsive to this NOC, but I think we should consider it and add some language. 'Cause that's a really good question. Um, if I could ask Usama, how would a cross-country comparison that doesn't include the US, how how would it respond? How would it inform US policy? Maybe that's the question. We could take that offline and better understand that. So sorry, we don't have a direct answer.
So the next question is, what instructions will reviewers receive in reading or reviewing applications responding to this NOC? So what I can share is that because this NOC doesn't have a special review consideration, the applications received as part of this will go to the standing review, will go to an appropriate standing review committee, which will likely be one that's convened by the CSR, or our Center for Scientific Review.
Well, what is helpful here, I'll just amend or add to that a little bit, is making sure that you tag the NOC in the application. Because what that does for reviewers, right? So as Krithi mentioned, it will go to a standing review committee. However, it will signal to those reviewers exactly what your application is targeting and why. Therefore, it will give them more information to better assess the merits scientifically and the feasibility. So it's kind of worth diagnosing the task that you do. That will allow us to go back and we can try and see what areas of science are still missing. What
Sorry,
questions
David,
have yet
I'm
to
going to
be
interrupt
asked.
you. I think the sound went out a little bit after you talked about the scientific merits. So if you could start over from that part, you talked about box 4B in the application. You talked about that being an indicator to your reviewers of, you know, where you were coming in from, what you were trying to do, and that would help them frame the scientific merits of your application. Can you start over from there?
My apologies about the tech issues. See if getting closer helps. So yes, it's a general review panel, and that means that it's going to go to a slate of reviewers that are either standing committee members of that review section, or for the temporary members that are there. However, tagging the NOC, what that does is it signals to those reviewers exactly why and how you are approaching NIA's directives and how you are approaching the science. It therefore gives them slightly more to be able to put your application in perspective. So again, no, there's not a special review criteria. However, tagging the NOC can indicate to reviewers why you're submitting this and therefore give them more basis to evaluate your application, which in my opinion is a good thing. More information is generally better than less.
Great, thank you so much. So our next question is, would qualitative methods or mixed methods be considered in this NOC, or is primarily quantitative research of some description preferable? So I hear there's, we haven't, there's no criteria stating that qualitative or mixed methods are non-responsive to the NOC. So I think, quantitative research is, we have pointed to a lot of large data sets and, described potential secondary analyses. So for this question, what I would recommend is, putting your idea in the form of one page of specific aims and talking to your program official about it. But there's no qualitative methods or mixed methods approaches are not forbidden by this NOC. So anything to add, David or Minky?
Nothing to add.
No, that was pretty clear.
So I don't see any additional questions. I think we've gone through 3. If I'll leave it. Oh. Okay, so if folks have other questions, please do feel free to submit them into the Q&A and we'll, answer them now, and then they'll also be available in writing later on. give it about another minute. And if we don't receive more questions, then I think we can wrap up. Okay, Aaron asks, can David reshare the links? They disappeared from the chat. I'm assuming you mean the links to the data sets. Is that right?
I have posted them back in the chat. Let me know if they are non-appearing. I hope they are. I hope they show up for everyone. So again, by sharing, thanks, Aaron, for confirming. These are including policy changes within the US. And so this is our suggestions as a starting place. This is not a limited set that you should only consider. Again, consider what your areas of expertise are, what your hypotheses of interest are, and where they align with this NOC. Then draft that one-page spec aims and reach out to Krithi, Minky, and myself, whoever you feel is most appropriate to your specific hypotheses and your specific application. And then the three of us will likely convene and either meet with you jointly or at least discuss with the others all the projects and ideas that we have coming in. It is what it is, and it's hard to speak in generalities without specific hypotheses to consider or look at. So please forgive any sort of vague response in that.
Great, that's really helpful. Thanks so much. I'm not seeing more questions coming in, but again, I'll give it about another minute, and if nothing comes in, then we can wrap up. But please do feel free to submit questions. It's good to be able to answer them in real time. Give it a couple more seconds. I'm starting to see folks sign off. So I wanted to thank everybody for attending. I'm really, really grateful for your interest in this scientific topic area. I think it's a very important research area for public health, and I'm very grateful for your attention. So looking forward to hearing from you, whether that's with specific AIMS pages or seeing applications later in the year. So thank you all so much. And thanks, David, Minky, Charlie, Mustan, and Dwayne for being able to get this together and making this webinar happen.